I'm going to give you a little bit of simple therapy. You start by simplifying possessions, simplifying thoughts, simplifying relationships, and simplifying spirituality. We have books for all of you, right, Jim? We have books for all of you. Just take a copy. Last time. It's been a book that's sold to over 80,000 police officers, so something's happening with it. I wrote in that book that you have to start from the beginning. How did that happen?
You touched the screen.
I did?
Yeah, it tells it to go forward.
How many times did I touch it?
Hit the down button.
Okay. See, now is when you're supposed to change the thing because I'm lost. When I wrote that you have to start with possessions, to some extent you still have to. But I've found that a lot of people respond more to working on different areas in possessions, which we'll get to tomorrow morning. But starting with possessions, let me get an answer to this question. I'm going to start a phrase, you repeat it after me. Now, what's going to happen is all of you are going to sit there knowing the answer, and you're not going to say it, so please help me. Plop, plop, fizz, fizz.
Oh,
very good, okay. Mr. Whipple, please don't squeeze the... Here we go. With Gilligan, the skipper too, a millionaire and his wife, a movie star, the professor, and... Very good, very good. You've passed that one. Let's try, yea, though I've wandered through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. For thou art with me, thou rod and thy staff comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. You see what's happened? That's, my anointest my feet with oil. That's probably one of the, or my cup runneth over, one of those. That's probably one of the most beautiful pieces of literature ever written. You've heard it every time you go to a funeral. Every time. It's beautiful. But you remember things. Plop, plop, fizz, fizz wasn't used for Alka-Seltzer probably before you were born, Rachel. I think it was 1972 or something. Mr. Sharman's dead now. Been dead quite a few years, actually. And if you're watching reruns of Gilligan's Island, I think this isn't the class for you. You've got other things you need to go to. But you remember those. You remember them, why? Because they were repeated. They were repeated, they were catchy. Keep that in mind. And I keep repeating it. Keep that in mind. And you also remember it because this is marketing. Therapy is marketing too, in a strange way. What I found, and there's truth to this, that 50% of Americans, which is probably more now because we have so many foreigners, cannot sing the Star-Spangled Banner. That was a study. 50% back in 91 could not sing the Star-Spangled Banner. At that point, 50% of Americans could sing the Green Acres song. Green Acres was a place for me. That's a problem. And the problem that I look at that as is sort of like the old joke, the Bugs Bunny cartoon, where Bugs is wandering through the desert. He's dry, he's thirsty. He comes up with a stand, and they're selling ties. And he says, I need water. I need water. The guy behind the counter says, hey, we don't sell water here, we sell ties. You want some water, you got to go that way. Bugs looks and goes, ties in a desert? And he's walking and walking and walking. He's getting thirstier and thirstier. The sun's beating down on him. He comes to the next place. He says, I need water, I want water. And the Italian guy behind the counter says, hey, we don't sell water here. We sell ties. You want a tie? I need water. Finally, he's going on, and he's just dropping, and you see him finally go in the sand. You think he's dead, but all of a sudden you start hearing some music playing in the background. And the music's going and going, and you see him come up with just one eye. And he sees Joe's Bar and Grill. So he gets up and he starts running over to Joe's Bar and Grill, and he gets to the door, and there's a big sign behind the bouncer saying, "Nobody entered without a tie." That's what we're taught. That's what we're taught. That unless we have the right possessions, we're not going to have the status, the happiness, or meet our needs. This is the kind of thing we're talking about, lifestyle. This is the kind of thing that got our cops in trouble. Remember the first thing that happened to police officers? They start buying things. They start buying things. They buy things for status, but in reality, who's got better status, Mother Teresa or Donald Trump? Who had better status? Jimmy Carter was one of the lowest rated presidents until recently. And he was one of the most admired men after he left the presidency. Deeds, not possessions, bring people status. Happiness, when were the people most happy in the initial slideshow? Most happy when they had the least. And as far as need, they need to eat, drink, urinate, defecate, find shelter in the winter. Eat, drink, urinate, defecate, find shelter in the winter. That was Albert Ellis that said that. And Danny will be talking about Albert Ellis later. People need to do something in their life that they can do, that they can handle, that starts them on the road. And one of the early stages, what I'm telling people to do is, tell me, what's your house look like? Oh, it's got clutter here, it's got clutter there, it's got things I'm not saving. Tell them to start cleaning up. You know, before we start working on this and this, you need to get that system used to you changing. Now, why is this important? Because the person, you're giving him something he can handle. In a day, you can declutter. And I see a few of you looking. You can declutter some in a day. In a day, you can get somewhere. You can start movement. Give him the message. We need to get people to see you moving. Now, in order to do that, you've got to teach them about the red Nami monkeys. Not necessarily, but the red Nami monkeys basically were monkeys that found out a way to survive in the Kalahari Desert. You see, the desert would be, half the time would be a big winter or big summer, rainy season, all things, and the other half of the year, it would go into a desert. And the monkeys had figured out how to find water because they would just follow the bigger animals. They knew what they had to do to follow the animals. Well, they had to get rid of the red Nami monkeys at one point because of the African revitalization program. And they couldn't get rid of them because the monkeys knew how to find water. So what they ended up doing was they would take the monkeys and they'd dig a hole in the ground. And they'd fill the hole full of nuts and berries. And the monkeys come wandering by, look in the hole, reach their hand in and grab a handful of nuts and berries. Now the top of the hole was real small. So the monkeys, once they had a handful of nuts and berries, couldn't get their hand out of the ground. And they would sit there for hours and hours and hours and even days, unable to get their hand out of the ground, until the park rangers would collect them and then they would transplant them elsewhere. Why is that important? Well, because that's what people do. They sit there and they collect possessions and get their handful of a possession and they don't let go. They refuse to let go. And in that refusing to let go, they put themselves at risk. 80% of paper filed never gets read again. 80%. 90% of catalogs never get ordered from. Magazines and books not touched in a year won't be. Half the gifts that you get, you will never use. You will never use. Think about that, Christmas. Half the gifts we'll never use. Yet, people buy these things, and then they buy them on top of credit. Credit, which was basically started so that the feudal lords could end up owning the serfs. You know, when the feudal system fell apart, they started allowing the serfs to own property. Well, the feudal lords decided, well, what we're going to do is create credit, because at some point the crop will fail. And when that crop fails, we'll own them again. The original distinction of credit was purposes of owning somebody. Now think about that. You're getting credit card statements. Anybody not have credit cards in here? You don't have credit cards? 2 women? Are you students? No, you're not a student, Rachel. Wow. If you don't own credit cards, if you start getting credit card statements, you're going to start getting a thing on there, federal law, that says if you pay the minimum on this, you'll remember that, you'll see this? You'll owe for 38 years. It's mind-boggling. Mind-boggling. Somebody's going to own a piece of you for 38 years. And that's because we don't realize the weight that credit has. I have an interesting story. When I was in Amsterdam, I was, maybe 30 years old. I was believing that I was going to stay in shape most of my life. And the hotel had a gym. So I was going to go over and bench press and run and all that kind of stuff, because I'd been in Europe for 2 weeks, and I was really looking forward to going over to the gym. So I went over to the gym and I warmed up, and I'm looking at the bench press, and people are sitting there bench pressing with like 1 weight on each side. I'm sitting there going, oh my God, these Dutch people are really like weak. This is phenomenal. They've got 1 weight on each side. This is really a phenomenon. You know, and I'm sitting there going over and watching, and a guy asked me if I wanted to work in, and I'm like, no, I have to put real weight on there, you know. Because I'm figuring, you know, if I start lifting, they're going to think Arnold Schwarzenegger came in, and, you know, they're going to be really impressed. Well, the bench clears, and I start putting weight on. And I was lifting 280, 290. So they're putting the weight on. I'm putting the weight on, putting a lot of weight on there, like 250. And I notice a group of these Dutch people are starting to gather, watching me. And I'm going, wait till they see this. Putting the weight on, one on either side, and one of the Dutch guys comes over and starts helping me put the weight on, another 45, putting the weight on. And I get under the bar, and I say, we're never going to have another war with Amsterdam after this. We'll never have another Dutch war. Get under the bar, start to move it. Ah! It doesn't move. I'm going, what the hell's wrong here? Meanwhile, of course, everybody's gathering around going, I'm under the bar again. Ah! It doesn't move. It doesn't even budge. Third time. Ah! People start walking away. One of the Dutch guys comes over and goes, kilos, not pounds, kilos. I had 450 some pounds on the bar. There was no way I was going to move it. And that's what possessions do to you. You just don't realize how heavy they are. You do. You do. You just don't realize how heavy they are. That's an important concept. If you're going to teach lifestyle, you're going to start working with those possessions. You've got to teach a person that. People don't get that naturally. What's the natural tendency? Oh, I can afford this. All I have to do is put it on the plastic. On Long Island, it's the boat. Oh my God. How many people own a boat? They say the best thing about a boat is the day that you get it and the day you get rid of it. How many people own the boat? They don't recognize that. And by teaching them that, teaching that the weight can be extreme, you're going to go a long way. And I'm telling you, sometimes sometimes that's the only thing they remember. But that means they'll come back because they learned something. They learned something good. Well, you know, he helped me declutter my house. He got me out of debt. We're psychologists, but we have to work with a person's full life and change their full life.